On the morning of May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn woke up, knowing she had only hours to live. She had been the most powerful woman in England. Now she was nothing but a traitor. But here is what the history books never told you: she may have been completely innocent. The year is 1527. The heavy oak doors of Hampton Court Palace enclose a king who is terrified of the wrath of God. Henry VIII is in the prime of his life, a massive, athletic, and brilliantly educated Renaissance prince. Yet, beneath the gold-threaded doublets and the absolute power, a deep paranoia is gnawing at his mind. His grand Tudor dynasty, forged in blood by his father after decades of civil war, is balancing on the edge of a knife. To survive, the dynasty needs one thing above all else: a legitimate male heir. For nearly 18 years, Henry has been married to Catherine of Aragon. She is a formidable woman, a Spanish princess, daughter of the legendary Isabella and Ferdinand, and deeply beloved by the English people. But their marriage has become a royal graveyard. Together, they have endured a devastating series of stillbirths, miscarriages, and infants who lived only a matter of days. Out of all her pregnancies, only a single child has survived. A girl, Princess Mary. In the 16th century, a female heir is viewed not as a blessing, but as a recipe for a violently disputed succession. As Catherine approaches her mid-40s, the tragic reality sets in. There will be no more children. There will be no son. Henry does not view this as a medical tragedy. To the deeply religious king, it is a divine judgment. Desperate for answers, Henry turns to his Bible, specifically to the book of Leviticus, which states, "If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing. They shall be childless." Before marrying Henry, Catherine had been briefly married to Henry's older brother Arthur, who died at the age of 15. Catherine had always sworn on her immortal soul that her marriage to Arthur was never consummated, allowing her to legally and morally marry Henry. But now, staring at the empty royal nurseries, Henry convinces himself that Catherine lied. He believes he has been living in mortal sin for nearly 2 decades, and that God has cursed his lineage as punishment. This profound religious terror gives birth to what would become known as the King's Great Matter. Henry wants an annulment. He wants the Pope to declare that his marriage to Catherine never legally existed. He entrusts this monumental task to his Lord Chancellor, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey. Wolsey is a man of staggering intellect and ambition, effectively ruling England on the king's behalf. Wolsey promises Henry that securing an annulment from Rome will be a simple matter of theological paperwork, but Wolsey has drastically miscalculated the geopolitical chessboard of Europe. In 1527, the troops of the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, sacked the city of Rome. Pope Clement VII is essentially forced to flee for his life and becomes a virtual prisoner of the emperor. And Emperor Charles is no neutral bystander. He is Catherine of Aragon's nephew. There is absolutely no way the captive pope will grant an annulment that would humiliate the emperor's aunt and bastardize her daughter. As Wolsey's diplomatic efforts stall in Rome, the atmosphere in the English court grows venomous. Catherine refuses to go quietly into a convent. She is a proud queen. She kneels before Henry in public, begging him to remember her loyalty, but she steadfastly defends the validity of their marriage. It is exactly in this suffocating climate of royal frustration and political deadlock that a new player steps onto the stage. A woman who will turn the king's desperate quest for a son into an obsession that will tear a country apart. Her name is Anne Boleyn. Anne has recently returned to the English court after spending her formative years in the sophisticated, fiercely modern courts of France. She is not considered a classical beauty by the pale, blonde standards of Tudor England. She has striking dark hair, dark expressive eyes, and a sharp, calculating intelligence. But what Anne possesses is far more dangerous than mere beauty. She has a natural magnetism, an effortless French elegance, and a rapier-sharp wit that leaves the men of the court spellbound. Henry is completely captivated. He begins writing her passionate, desperate love letters, showering her with jewels, and expecting her to fall into his bed, just as her own sister, Mary Boleyn, had done years before. But Anne is a masterful strategist. She looks at the discarded mistresses of the king and makes a breathtaking gamble. She tells the king no. She refuses to yield her virtue. She refuses to be a temporary distraction. Anne makes it crystal clear she will only surrender herself to Henry as his legally wedded wife. She will not be a mistress, she will be the Queen of England. This refusal acts like gasoline on the fire of Henry's desire. What begins as a dynastic panic over a male heir morphs into an all-consuming obsession with Anne Boleyn. As the years drag on and Cardinal Wolsey repeatedly fails to secure the divorce from Rome, Anne begins to whisper a radical new idea into the king's ear. She gives him banned, heretical books imported from Europe. These texts argue a revolutionary concept that a king is appointed directly by God, and that no foreign bishop, not even the Pope, has the right to dictate the laws of England or the conscience of its monarch. It is the perfect solution. If Rome will not grant the king his divorce, then Rome must be removed from the equation entirely. By 1529, Cardinal Wolsey's failure seals his doom. Stripped of his immense wealth and charged with treason, Wolsey dies in disgrace before he can face the executioner. The old world is dying. Guided by the iron will of Anne Boleyn and the ruthless legal mind of a rising star named Thomas Cromwell, Henry prepares to do the unthinkable. He is going to break 1,000 years of religious tradition, sever England from the Catholic Church, and declare himself supreme head of a new religion. The stage is set for the most dramatic and bloodiest revolution in English history. And sitting at the very center of the storm is a dark-haired woman who has waited patiently for her crown. January 1533. After 7 agonizing years of political maneuvering, diplomatic wars, and the fracturing of a kingdom, Anne Boleyn has finally won. In a secret, hushed ceremony before dawn, she marries King Henry VIII. She is already pregnant, carrying what Henry is certain is the prophesied male heir. By June, Anne is crowned Queen of England in a lavish ceremony at Westminster Abbey. She is adorned in robes of purple velvet and weighed down by the heavy gold crown of St. Edward. She has achieved the impossible. She has overthrown a beloved Spanish princess, broken the power of the Pope in England, and secured the ultimate prize. But as Anne sits on her gilded throne, she looks out at a court and a country that deeply resents her. To the common people of England, she is not their queen. She is the goggle-eyed whore, the dark sorceress who bewitched their king and destroyed the rightful queen, Catherine. The crowds at her coronation are unnervingly quiet. Some even refuse to remove their hats as she passes. But public opinion is the least of Anne's problems. The true danger lies within the very walls of the palace. In September 1533, Anne went into labour. Henry prepares the royal nurseries, orders the heralds to write the official proclamations, and plans extravagant jousts to celebrate the birth of his new son. But when the child arrives, the celebrations are abruptly cancelled. It is a girl. Princess Elizabeth. For Henry, it is a crushing, humiliating blow. He hides his disappointment behind forced smiles, assuring Anne that boys will follow. But the crack in their foundation has been made. Henry had torn his kingdom apart for a son. A daughter, no matter how healthy, is not what he paid for. Anne realizes instantly that her position is intensely precarious. She is only safe as long as she holds the king's affection, and that affection is tied entirely to her womb. To compensate for her failure to produce a boy, Anne begins to assert her power in the court. And this is where she makes her most fatal mistakes. History often paints Anne Boleyn merely as a romantic figure or a victim, but the truth is far more complex. Anne is a brilliant, highly educated, and aggressive politician. She does not want to be a silent consort who merely sows and prays. She wants to rule. She actively pushes for radical religious reforms, placing evangelical bishops into positions of power. She directs foreign policy, favoring an alliance with France over Spain. And most dangerously, she has a lethal temper. Anne is notoriously sharp-tongued, arrogant, and unforgiving. If a courtier crosses her, she does not hesitate to humiliate them in public. She begins to alienate the powerful men who helped put her on the throne. The most lethal among them is Thomas Cromwell. Cromwell, the king's ruthless chief minister, had been Anne's closest ally. Together, they orchestrated the break from Rome. But as the king begins to dissolve the wealthy Catholic monasteries, Anne and Cromwell clash violently over the spoils. Cromwell wants to funnel the massive wealth directly into the king's treasury to secure his own power. Anne demands that the money be used for education and charity. It is a battle of egos between two of the most ruthless operators in England. And Cromwell, a man who survived the deadly politics of the Tudor court by being utterly devoid of sentimentality, quietly realizes that the Queen is no longer an asset. She is a liability. Meanwhile, the shadows of the court are crawling with her enemies. The conservative, Catholic nobles, the traditional aristocracy, despise Anne for her low birth and her heretical religion. They form the imperial faction, secretly led by Eustace Chapuz, the brilliant and cunning Spanish ambassador. Chapuz operates a sophisticated network of spies within Anne's own household. He refers to her in his coded letters not as the Queen, but as the concubine. His sole mission is to see Anne destroyed and Catherine's daughter Mary restored to the line of succession. Surrounded by vipers, Anne's only shield is Henry. But the king is changing. The passionate, poetry-writing lover who moved heaven and earth for Anne is gone. In his place is an aging, tyrannical monarch prone to dark moods and explosive rage. In 1534, and again in 1535, Anne suffers devastating miscarriages. With each failure, Henry's paranoia returns. The same terrifying thought that doomed his first marriage creeps back into his mind. Has God cursed this marriage too? Friction between the royal couple turns into explosive, public screaming matches. During one terrifying argument, Henry coldly reminds his wife, "I can drag you down as quickly as I raised you." And then, the final piece of the puzzle falls into place. As Henry's eye begins to wander, looking for an escape from his stressful, politically demanding wife, it lands on one of Anne's own ladies-in-waiting. She is the exact opposite of Anne. Where Anne is dark, fierce, and argumentative, this young woman is pale, blonde, silent, and fiercely submissive. Her name is Jane Seymour. The hunter is about to become the hunted. The conspiracy to remove the Queen of England is about to begin. By early 1536, the atmosphere in the Tudor court had shifted from tense to toxic. Anne Boleyn's power is unraveling, and her enemies, led by the ruthless Thomas Cromwell, are circling. The fatal blow comes in January 1536. Catherine of Aragon, Henry's discarded first wife, dies in exile. Anne briefly rejoices, believing she is finally secure. But on the exact day of Catherine's funeral, tragedy strikes. Anne, pregnant for the third time since Elizabeth, suffers a catastrophic miscarriage. It is said the child was deformed, a boy. For Henry, this is the final, undeniable proof. He tells his courtiers that he had been seduced by witchcraft. He is completely done with Anne Boleyn. He wants to be free to marry the quiet, submissive Jane Seymour. But there is a major problem. Anne is the anointed Queen of England. Henry cannot simply divorce her as he did Catherine. Anne would fight him to the bitter end. He needs a permanent solution. He needs her dead. Henry turns to Thomas Cromwell and gives a chilling, unspoken order: get rid of her. Cromwell operates with terrifying efficiency. He knows that simply accusing the Queen of treason is not enough. He needs to destroy her reputation completely, making her a monster in the eyes of the public. He begins to construct a web of lies so monstrous, so deeply humiliating, that no one would dare defend her. He sets his sights on Anne's inner circle, searching for any weakness. In late April 1536, the arrests began. The first to fall is Mark Smeaton, a young, handsome musician in the Queen's household. Smeaton is not a nobleman, he is a commoner, making him vulnerable. Cromwell takes Smeaton to his house and interrogates him. It is widely believed Smeaton was brutally tortured, a knotted rope twisted tightly around his eyes until the pain became unbearable. Broken and terrified, Smeaton confesses to the impossible that he had slept with the Queen. But Cromwell doesn't stop with a musician. He needs bigger targets to make the conspiracy believable. Next arrested is Sir Henry Norris, one of the King's closest friends and most trusted gentleman of the Privy Chamber. Then comes Sir William Brereton and Sir Francis Weston, both powerful men in the court. And then Cromwell delivers the most devastating blow of all. He arrests George Boleyn, Lord Rochford, Anne's own brother. The charges are staggering. Cromwell accuses Anne not just of adultery with 5 different men, but of plotting the king's death and, most horrifyingly to the Tudor mind, of incest with her own brother. The court is in shock. It is an avalanche of accusations designed to bury Anne alive. On May 2nd, Anne is completely unaware of the monstrous trap closing around her. She is watching a tennis match at Greenwich Palace when she is abruptly informed that the king has left without saying goodbye. Shortly after, she is brought before her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, and members of the King's Council. They inform her of the charges: adultery, treason, incest. Anne reacts with sheer terror. She falls to her knees, weeping, swearing on the salvation of her soul that she is entirely innocent. But it doesn't matter. The verdict has already been decided. That afternoon, Anne was placed on a barge and rowed down the River Thames to the Tower of London. As she passes through the Traitor's Gate, the heavy iron portcullis crashing down behind her, the reality of her situation finally shatters her composure. She falls to the damp stone steps, crying out, "Shall I go into a dungeon?" She is placed in the same royal apartments where she had stayed before her glorious coronation, just 3 years earlier. The psychological cruelty is immense. Surrounded by hostile ladies in waiting who act as Cromwell's spies, Anne's mind begins to crack. She swings wildly between hysterical laughter and deep sobbing despair. She knows the king. She knows Cromwell. She knows that from the moment those iron gates closed, she was already a dead woman. On May 12, 1536, the 4 commoners and knights, Mark Smeaton, Henry Norris, William Brereton, and Francis Weston, are put on trial. It is a terrifyingly swift and farcical process. Despite the complete lack of physical evidence, and with only Smeaton's torture-induced confession to rely on, all 4 men are found guilty of high treason. 3 days later, on May 15, the Queen of England and her brother, Lord Rochford, face their own trials in the Great Hall of the Tower of London. Because they are nobility, they must be judged by a jury of their peers. 2,000 spectators pack into the hall, desperate to witness the fall of the woman they had hated for so long. When Anne Boleyn enters the Great Hall, The crowd expects to see a broken, hysterical woman. Instead, they are met with a magnificent display of royal dignity. Anne wears a dark gown, her head held high, her face perfectly composed. She is no longer the panicked prisoner who arrived at the Tower 2 weeks earlier. In the face of certain death, she has found her ultimate strength. The jury sitting in judgment over her is a masterpiece of psychological cruelty engineered by Thomas Cromwell. Presiding over the court is her own uncle, the Duke of Norfolk. Sitting among the jury is Henry VIII, the man Anne had truly loved and was briefly betrothed to before the king tore them apart. The monstrous charges are read aloud. Anne is accused of seducing the men, of poisoning Catherine of Aragon, of mocking the king's clothes, and of plotting his death so she could rule alone. Anne defends herself without legal counsel. She argues with such stunning intellect, clarity, and passion that the hostile crowd actually begins to murmur in her defense. Even the Spanish ambassador, her greatest enemy, would later admit she defended herself magnificently. But this is not a trial. It is a theatre of murder. The verdict is a foregone conclusion. Her uncle, with tears streaming down his face, pronounces her guilty. He sentences the Queen of England to be burned at the stake or beheaded, depending on the king's mercy. Upon hearing the verdict, Henry VIII, overwhelmed by the horror of what he has just participated in, collapses in the jury box and has to be carried out. Through it all, Anne remains unshaken. She looks at her judges and says, "I believe you have reasons and occasions to make me die. But they must be other than those that have been produced here. For I am entirely innocent of all these accusations." On May 17, Anne's brother George and the other 4 men are led out to Tower Hill and beheaded. Anne is now completely alone. She prepares to die on the morning of May 18. She takes her final confession, swearing on the Holy Sacrament that she has never been unfaithful to the king. But the psychological torture is not over. The execution is suddenly delayed. King Henry has decided to show his wife one final, twisted act of mercy. He will not allow her to be burned, nor will he use the traditional English axe, which was notoriously blunt and often required multiple strikes. Instead, he has secretly dispatched a messenger to France to hire the executioner of Calais, a master who kills with a single stroke of a razor-sharp, two-handed sword. The terrifying reality is that Henry ordered this French swordsman before Anne's trial even began. He had decided her guilt before she ever stepped into the courtroom. Finally, the morning of May 19, 1536, arrives. Shortly before 8 o'clock, Anne Boleyn emerges from her chambers. She wears a striking gown of dark grey damask over a crimson petticoat, the colour of Catholic martyrdom. An English-French hood sits on her dark hair. She is escorted to the scaffold erected on Tower Green. The crowd is silent. She climbs the wooden steps and addresses the people. Her final speech is a political masterpiece. She knows that if she directly attacks the king, Henry will take his vengeance out on her 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth. To protect her child, Anne plays the required role. She praises Henry as a gentle and sovereign lord, but she carefully, deliberately, refuses to confess to any crime. She removes her heavy cloak and her hood, tucking her long dark hair into a linen cap. She pays the executioner his traditional gold coin. Anne kneels in the straw. Unlike with an axe, there is no block for her to rest her head on. She must kneel upright, keeping her neck perfectly straight, waiting in the terrifying darkness of a blindfold. She begins to pray repeatedly. "To Christ I commend my soul, Jesus. Receive my soul," the French executioner, knowing the sheer terror of anticipating the blade, performs a final act of mercy. He takes off his shoes so she cannot hear his footsteps. He quietly signals his assistant to walk to her right side. "Fetch me my sword." The executioner shouts to the assistant. Anne's head twitches slightly toward the sound. In that exact fraction of a second, the executioner, standing on her left, swings the massive blade. The cannon blasts across the River Thames. It is the signal King Henry VIII has been waiting for. His wife is dead. The great Tudor experiment has ended in a pool of blood. And the very next day, Henry will officially betroth himself to Jane Seymour. There was no grand royal funeral for Anne Boleyn. The woman who had worn the heavy gold crown of St. Edward, the woman who had fractured the world's most powerful church, was treated with the careless disposal of a traitor. Her weeping ladies-in-waiting, stripped of their royal titles, wrapped her head and body in white cloth. Because the king had not even bothered to provide a coffin, they placed her remains inside an empty elm wood arrow chest. She was hastily buried beneath the cold stone floor of the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, within the walls of the tower. No monument was raised, no name was carved into the stone. King Henry VIII did not mourn. Just 11 days after Anne's severed head fell onto Tower Green, Henry married Jane Seymour. He then began a systematic, obsessive campaign to erase Anne Boleyn from existence. He ordered stonemasons to chisel away her intertwined initials, the H&A, from the fireplaces and wooden screens of Hampton Court Palace. He ordered her portraits destroyed and her royal falcon badges burned. He wanted the world to forget she had ever lived. But history is rarely so easily silenced. Today, almost all modern historians agree on one undeniable fact. Anne Boleyn was entirely innocent of the charges against her. The adultery, the treason, the incest, it was all a brilliant, monstrous fabrication orchestrated by Thomas Cromwell to free the king. The 5 men who died on Tower Hill were collateral damage, murdered simply to make the Queen's guilt look believable. Henry VIII eventually got the son he had shed so much blood for. But Prince Edward was frail and died at the age of 15. The Tudor male line was extinguished almost as soon as it began. The ultimate irony of Henry's reign, and the greatest revenge of Anne Boleyn, lay in the child he had cast aside. The little girl who was declared a bastard and banished from the court would outsurvive them all. In 1558, Anne Boleyn's daughter ascended to the throne as Queen Elizabeth I. She would go on to rule for 44 years, defeating the Spanish Armada, inspiring a golden age of literature and exploration, and becoming arguably the greatest monarch in English history. Elizabeth never spoke publicly of her mother. To do so was too dangerous. But in secret, she wore a locket ring. Inside were 2 hidden portraits, one of herself and one of the mother who had died so she could live. Anne Boleyn was Queen of England for just 1,000 days, but her blood shaped the future of the world. The story of Anne Boleyn is a terrifying reminder of how quickly power can turn into poison. She was a brilliant woman who dared to play the deadliest political game in history, and for a brief, blinding moment, she won. What do you think? Was Anne Boleyn a ruthless, ambition-driven politician who went too far, or a tragic victim of a tyrannical king? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey into the shadows of Tudor history, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you never miss an episode of Dark Royals. Until next time, remember that in the halls of absolute power, no one is ever truly safe.